Welcome to the Dark Mysteries Podcast, where we tell dark and mysterious stories. If you like the dark and mysterious, hit that like and subscribe button to help support the channel. Today, I've been really digging into something that just keeps pulling people back in. The disappearance of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan. You know, back in 1937, trying to fly around the world.
It's a classic, isn't it? A true enduring mystery. You have this absolute icon trying this incredible feat and then just gone.
Exactly. Vanished. And I've got this stack of stuff here, official reports, eyewitness accounts, just decades of people trying to figure it out.
It's like a giant jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing.
Totally. So our mission today really is to unpack the most compelling bits, especially for you, our listener. If you like getting to the heart of a story, finding those aha moments, we'll try to cut through the noise.
Yeah, focus on the key evidence, the main arguments. We're not going to drown you in every single tiny detail.
Right. We'll highlight the surprising stuff, the logical bits that make this mystery stick around. And we're going to focus mainly on the two big theories. The ocean crash.
The sort of official version initially.
And the other one, the possibility they actually landed on that island, Nikumaroro.
Let's start with the first one then. The ocean crash.
Okay, yeah. So this was the initial widely accepted idea, right?
Yeah.
That Earhart and Noonan just ran out of fuel.
Pretty much. The U.S. Navy, the Coast Guard, they looked at the situation, assumed fuel exhaustion, and concluded they crashed into the Pacific near Howland Island.
And the cause of death assumed was drowning.
Right. That became the standard explanation for a long time.
And you can kind of see why, especially early on. There wasn't much else to go on. What about those radio signals people reported hearing afterwards?
Well, that's where it gets murky. There were reports, yeah. Carrier waves heard near Howland, even some SOS messages sort of in the direction of the Phoenix Islands where Nikumaroro is. But they couldn't definitively trace them back to Earhart. You know, radio back then, interference, other signals, maybe even wishful thinking. It was all very uncertain.
Okay, so not solid proof either way on the signals. And I read about people on other islands nearby, like Aurora and Tamana.
Yeah, the claims were that residents there didn't hear or see anything. No plane going down.
Which would suggest, maybe, they weren't super close to those islands when whatever happened, happened.
It fits the narrative that they were closer to Howland or went down an open ocean. And the government reports at the time really leaned into the idea of bad conditions.
Ah, the weather.
Right. Yeah. Strong headwinds, maybe heavy weather, low visibility, all things that would make finding a tiny speck like Howland Island incredibly hard.
And burn through fuel faster if they're circling, searching.
Exactly. The Navy even predicted they might have overcorrected their navigation, missed Howland, and ended up over empty ocean.
There was a Navy lieutenant, Warren Harvey. He said something about flying into a storm.
He did. Basically said if they entered a storm, their chances were, well, almost nil. Very dangerous.
Paints a grim picture. And wasn't there something about their speed, too?
There were some calculations suggesting they might have been flying a bit below the recommended speed, maybe 110 knots instead of 130.
Which means?
Well, on its own, maybe not critical, but if they were searching for Howland longer than planned, that slower speed means more time in the air, burning more fuel.
And Earhart herself mentioned fuel concerns, didn't she, in her last messages?
She did. Reported being worried about fuel in that last hour of broadcasting. That's a pretty significant point for the crash theory.
Yeah, it is. And then there was that message from Captain Thompson on the Itasca, the ship waiting for them.
Reporting that Earhart indicated she had about half an hour of fuel left and still hadn't spotted land.
That sounds pretty definitive, like they were about to ditch.
It points strongly in that direction, absolutely. And her very last confirmed transmission said they were flying up and down line 157-337.
Which runs right through Howland Island.
Exactly. So they were in the right area, searching along that line. Given all that, you can understand why the Navy and Coast Guard concluded crash and sink.
Okay. So that's the foundation of the ocean crash theory. Makes sense based on what they knew then.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's Nikumaroro.
Right. The alternative. This theory suggests they didn't crash in the ocean, but managed to make a landing, maybe a rough one, on Nikumaroro.
Which used to be called Gardner Island, yeah. A little coral atoll southeast of Howland.
That's the one. And the idea is they survived, at least for a while, as castaways.
Okay, that's a very different picture. What fuels this theory? Why do people lean towards it?
Several reasons. First, just the character of Earhart and Noonan. People who knew them felt they wouldn't just give up and ditch if there was any other option.
Earhart's determination was legendary.
Absolutely. And Noonan's wife apparently believed he was the type to turn back if things looked really bad, not risk ditching in the middle of nowhere. Plus, there's a quote attributed to Earhart.
Saying what?
Something like, if she couldn't find Howland, she'd look for a nearby island, preferably one with fresh water, and try to land there.
And Nikumaroro fits geographically.
It does. And crucially, remember that flight line? 157337?
But when she said she was flying,
Nikumaroro lies directly on that line, just further southeast from Howland. So if they missed Howland but kept going on that line...
they could have flown right over or very close to Nikumaroro.
Interesting. But what about the bad weather the crash theory relies on?
Yes. This is a huge point of debate. Proponents of the Nikumaroro theory argue there's actually very little solid evidence of terrible weather right when they would have arrived near Howland.
So the official reports might have exaggerated it.
Some researchers think so. One, Roland Reineck, even suggested the Navy might have fabricated the really bad weather story. And Earhart herself didn't report major storms in her transmissions.
What did other sources say about the weather? Well, meteorological reports from the University of Hawaii apparently indicated conditions were actually suitable for flying, and the chief radio guy on the Itasca, Leo Bellertz, he reported it as a clear day.
Wow. Okay, that really casts doubt on a key part of the ocean crash explanation.
It does. If the weather wasn't impossible, why didn't they find Howland, or at least something? Which leads to the next point, the lack of wreckage near Howland.
Right, the big search found nothing, you said. No oil slick, no floating debris.
Exactly. A massive search and nothing concrete found in the water around Howland. That silence is deafening in a way.
And Nikumaroro wasn't really searched initially.
It was outside the main search radius. They were looking southwest of Howland, assuming a water landing and drift from currents. If Earhart landed on Nikumaroro, they were searching in the wrong place entirely.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about the plane itself? Could it have survived a landing?
Well, the Electra had fuel tanks designed for buoyancy. If they ditched gently on calm water, the plane might have floated for quite a while, making it easier to spot.
But a landing on a coral reef?
Could have been rough. Damaged the plane significantly. It might have settled on the reef flat, maybe got carried out by tides later, especially with those deep drop-offs near the shore. It could explain why the plane itself vanished without a trace.
And the radio signals? You mentioned they might not have worked if the plane was in the water?
Right. The Navy's own report noted the radio power supply's location, likely unusable if submerged. But those continued transmissions people reported hearing.
They make more sense if the plane was on land.
Potentially, yes. The Electra plane was, over 10 feet tall? The highest tides predicted for Nikumaroro around that time were maybe 6.5 feet.
So the radio gear could have stayed dry, at least some of the time.
Especially at low tide. And interestingly, many of those post-disappearance signals were heard during low tide periods on Nikumaroro. It fits.
That is a compelling detail. Okay,
Yes.
so the circumstances seem plausible. What about actual physical evidence found on Nikumaroro?
This is where groups like Tigger have done a lot of work. They found artifacts over the years, things like a woman's compact mirror with rouge from that era.
Consistent with Earhart.
Plausibly, yes. Also a jar fragment that seems to have held mercury-based freckle cream. Earhart had freckles.
Okay, what else?
A snap fastener, like one from a specific first aid kit known to be on the plane. A zipper pull made in the U.S. dating from 33 to 36, which helps rule out later shipwrecks.
Like the SS Norwich City.
Exactly. Also, part of a woman's shoe heel, a style Earhart wore. Bits of aluminum foil, maybe from a signal flare. And even a wooden box, possibly for a sextant like Noonan used.
Wow. That's quite a collection of potential lengths. Circumstantial maybe, but it adds up.
It does paint a picture. But the most debated find, of course, is the bones.
The skeletal remains found back in 1940.
Yes, found under a wren tree. And interestingly, forensic dogs taken there much more recently, in 2017, seem to indicate that same spot as where human remains had decomposed.
But the original analysis said they were male bones, right? Which ruled out Earhart.
That was the conclusion back then, yes. Dr. Hoodless examined them and decided they belonged to a stocky male.
But forensic science has changed a lot since 1940.
Massively. So, more recently, a forensic anthropologist, Richard Jantz, took another look. Not at the bones themselves, sadly they were lost, but at Hoodless's original measurement data.
And what did he find?
Using modern statistical methods, he compared Hoodless's measurements to Earhart's known dimensions from photos, clothing measurements, things like that. His conclusion was striking.
Which was?
That the bones were 84 times more likely to belong to Amelia Earhart than to just some random person.
84 times. That's huge.
It's a very strong statistical link. Jantz argued that Hoodless, using older methods, might have misinterpreted features like a robust tibia or narrow hips, which could actually fit a tall, slender woman like Earhart.
So the initial male identification could have just been wrong.
That's Jantz's argument. He suggests the simplest explanation, given Earhart disappeared nearby and these bones match her profile so well statistically, is that they are her remains.
Even if they're not definitively proven hers, the similarity is still remarkable.
Exactly. The statistics point very strongly towards someone with Earhart's specific physical characteristics being associated with those bones.
But what about Fred Noonan? If the bones were Earhart's, where are his?
That's a question people ask. The Nikumaroro proponents suggest his remains might simply have been lost to the sea. Strong currents, the reef environment. But it's plausible his body could have been washed away.
Okay. So, weighing it all up now. Ocean crash versus Nikumaroro landing. Where does the balance seem to sit today?
Well, the ocean crash theory still holds the official status, largely based on the lack of initial proof for anything else. It relies on assumptions made at the time.
But the Nikumaroro theory seems to have gathered more tangible stuff over the years.
It feels that way, yes. Actual artifacts, the bone reanalysis, and key pillars of the ocean crash theory, like the really bad weather, the absolute certainty of fuel exhaustion leading immediately to a crash, the initial bone analysis, those have all been pretty seriously questioned or challenged.
And you still have that nagging lack of any wreckage found near Howland. No oil, no debris.
Which remains a big hole in the ocean crash scenario. If they went down there, where is the evidence? The Nikumaroro theory uses deductive reasoning from physical finds.
Plus, the plane had a lifeboat, oars. If they did ditch successfully near the search area, why didn't they use them? Why did they just disappear completely?
It adds another layer of difficulty to explaining a simple ditching near Howland.
So, thinking about this whole enduring mystery, what's the takeaway?
Well, I think the key thing is that while the official conclusion points one way, a tragic loss in the Pacific, the evidence from Nikumaroro offers this really compelling alternative. Maybe more hopeful in some ways, imagining survival, but still ultimately tragic.
It definitely complicates the simple narrative.
It does. Those artifacts, the bone analysis, they really force us to question the initial assumptions and maybe how the search was focused. This deep dive shows the story is way more nuanced than just plane crash.
It really highlights how important it is to keep investigating, keep questioning, even decades later.
Absolutely. The power of persistence when faced with the unknown. And it makes you wonder, what else might still be out there?
Yeah. So, for you listening, after hearing all this, which theory feels more likely to you? The ocean crash or the Nikumaroro landing? What pieces of evidence really stand out?
We'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts on this. It's a mystery that invites speculation.
That's right. Let us know your theories. We discuss new stories every Monday, so don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Leave a comment and tell us stories you think we should discuss in the future on the Dark Mysteries Podcast.